Right.
Yeah. Okay. So, Naughty Talks with me, Francis, Matt Bonvento, and my father, Francisco Oliver. Let me introduce my father. He's been in shipping for 40 years
42
now.
years.
42
Wow.
years, and 42 years in the Caribbean. And the way things are done in the Caribbean is a little bit different from the U.S. And he's got a bunch of stories, and maybe he'll share a story with us today about his days working in the maritime industry here in the Caribbean. All right, Dad. Uh, so, um, what's when you think about your career and what you've
Let's
done in the Caribbean? Hmm?
let's start where everything starts.
Okay.
Normally in the family, we're coming from a family. My grandfather came from Scheveningen in Holland to Santiago de Cuba and Puerto Padre, and there was a family there, and they was building three mast sail ships, schooners, big schooners, in that time. And Cuba West, and that time we talking about since he born in 1842, and they starting with this venture in the 1900s. They that time Cuba was the island in the Caribbean because first of all the Spaniards and everything. The Caribbean was always very Catholic, and the Catholics were starting in in Cuba. So they went over building there, and then all the food and everything was coming from out Puerto Padre, Cuba. That's near to Santiago. Uh, it's coming out, and they were sailing from there. Even Hispaniola was this time was only Hispaniola. It wasn't Haiti and Santo Domingo, but was one big island, Hispaniola. And they were sailing to there. From there, they were sailing over to uh, Coro in Venezuela. Coro was at that time like Caracas today, the big capital, because the Catholics was very strong. The first Catholic, um, let's say, the power was from Hispaniola, Coro, Venezuela, and normally they was coming over to Aruba and Curacao. Those was the two islands, and from there they sailed back. This was the turnaround, and that in the since till the 1940, 45, before the Second War, this was the they was working. And that's what my grandfather is. We coming from that, and from there, still my uncle was working so many years with the Norwegian um, companies. My brother and we myself started 42 years ago. We started first in a small boat we had bought, and we was up to from here from Curacao to Colombia and Aruba to was from Aruba to Colombia because Colombia Aruba was in that time in the we talking about in the 60s and the 70s, between 60 and the 70s. um, the world export coffee in the world, and they never had a coffee plant there, but there was really the export coffee because all the coffee was coming out of Colombia. The Caribbean in himself was the islands, all of them was living much more from each other. Only one very important part of the Caribbean is that you had only one leg of sailing. So that's one of the reasons why the shipping and the between the islands was very difficult because you only had one leg. All the expensive was only one way from one island to the other. You wouldn't get never a traffic back because all the islands are important, importing islands. So they had only have to import all the time uh, from one each other, but not exporting really. So it was very difficult. With all that struggling, but still the expense, and that made the product, was making the products very expensive. And that was going up to the 80s. And in the 80s, when we get the big problem, oil problem so then we got create more from the small little boat. We went to another boat we bought from the government, and this was the Marantil. And then we started into steaming and really in the business. And that was going on pretty well for only 4 or 5 years. Then in the 80s, then you get, sorry, Gotti, let me get a step back before. That was in the 70s, 75. And in the 80s, we get the big oil, the shop ran and get them out. Then we, sorry, we was having fuel for $26 per ton at that time. And it bumped up right away to $80 per ton. So that had given a really shock in all the shipping and industry in the Caribbean. And if that was not enough, in the 85, then we get sea land coming in with the containers. So all the conventional vessels, what we had a lot of people working because the unloading and loading, now you get the booming coming in right away from one drastically from general cargo to container. And not only that time, because only we had the fuel, the duty fuel went up to $80 per ton. Well, it went up steadily from 40 to 60, 60 to 75. But you could really make still, the freight was only 86 up to $90 per ton. Then the containers coming in, sea land coming with the invention of the containers progressively. Then the cargo word from $80 dropped to $40 again. So Caribbean had in all these years a very difficulty, ups and downs, and then was very hard to survive. But we still was there, and Curacao we was lucky that Curacao had and still have always a very good harbor, and the port entry, a very Holland had started building up with a container. When the container came in the 80s, 85, they're building a new general terminal for containers. So we was very lucky for that part. And but still, if you see the timing between from the 60s to the 90s, it's not 40 years. When with a small island, it's not so much many years. This because all the islands always due our system and governments we have, decisions wasn't always made at the right moment. It takes years and years to move on. And I think this is more or less a little bit how it went and is. And still, it's not changed much in that part. One of our surviving was very, very good, that because we belonged to our sixth island at that time to the Netherlands until it was existing. You had, and the government was subsidized some of the cargoes, so you could still make it, but it was never a big bite of it, because you had long times and people. And another struggling that we had very much in the Caribbean had to have professionals, people who had enough interest, because in the islands we have only Bonaire had these people from Bonaire had more interest to be a sailor, and around the Caribbean too it wasn't much, and maybe in St. Martin you had some, the Trinidadians was a little bit. the French part was one of the island, the most islands had suffered a lot for their supply.
Tapando a câmera com o papo dele.
Oh, sorry. But so it has, we have so long, big stories about it.
Why don't you, can you tell us like one story, like one voyage or something that happened that sticks out in your mind? That's something maybe that was funny or maybe something that was interesting that happened.
Yeah, sure. That's why we say Curacao was always lucky. We are very lucky here, a little bit part of it, that always in the islands during their political problems like Haiti, for instance, that's one of the, not now, but still, and we talk about in the 90s, I think they had two, three times, and Santo Domingo too. When they had blockade from the US and this part, then all the cargo was coming to Curacao. Then we had very movement. It was interested. It was dynamic, and you was living it very interested. Sure, the last one that we had made before we stopped was with Haiti. I think this was in the, if I'm not pretty sure, was in the 98, 97, something like that. And the Caribbean, let me see another part of nice of this. And Venezuela was always very important to us too, because this was a big continent. And all the time when they had problems and strikes in Venezuela, then we had all the containers coming here, and we was doing a lot of feeder servers, and that time with Netloid, and those are interesting stories, and that. But there was various, was a long time, but and then between you had a little bit more activities and very interested.
Francis was telling me a story just before you came on. I remember when I came to visit, you had this really old, nasty, horrible dog that kept in a big cage, and he said that dog had survived the ship sinking.
Veterano.
Oh, but Rottweiler, yeah. He's our salesman. As our perfect. He was hardworking, and he is not only he's one of the hard work, because he was doing that time a lot of feeders to Margarita, Venezuela, and we was bounding into La Guaira, Venezuela, and then from there we was uploading the last rest containers up to Margarita. And when this Latin American ports, when you go, you know how it's working. You had a lot of visiting from the customs, the authorities, and everybody was, they always need something. And it was always, we had to always on board a lot of cigarettes, carton of cigarettes and carton of whiskey or booze. So they coming only to get all their part of it. And we decided, we brought him on board for like a puppy, just because it was very nice. When he was developing more and more there on board, we start thinking we could not go with her anymore, because he was doing a really good job. What is his job? Because they're not coming aboard. They will stay on shore. Hey, Captain, I'm here. You then had to come on board. So just send his bottle of whatever you was planning that day to give away, and they taking the paperwork, and it was a very lovely dog. And still today, always, sure, my wife Miriam is always remember, and very a dog, very obedient, no?
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah, so the dog would basically keep the immigration, sorry, the customs people who always looking for a shakedown at bay.
Yeah. It was very interested, and he would never come on, on board. Once I remember my wife was there and he was there. The Guardian was here in Newport. He was, I think, he was unloading cement. Yeah, and the ladder was the gangway was put on, and Miriam said to the captain, "He will come down." I said, "No, he will not come down." And apparently, Veterano seeing Miriam and seeing myself there, so he was decided when the captain wasn't there to come down. So I remember the captain came down, and it was a really fight, like we say, man to man. This was a dog to man, a really fight, and to get him on board. And he went on board, and I think that was the last time he had think about it to do that. Yeah. Yeah, that they had a very. He was really the pretty on board. You know, he was doing a good job. And since when the vessel sunk, is the only thing I got back. We get back from the ship. That's Veterano. The only thing they could bring the dock, Veterano, was the only thing they brought back when the Coast Guard had picked them up at sea.
Yeah, and there's a newspaper that we still have where they tried to bring Veterano on board the patrol ship, but they couldn't because he was so violent. So
Yeah.
Veterano had to basically swim alongside the Coast Guard boat to shore.
Yeah. And it was a very interested dog. You know, very interested. You and it became part of us as well. Yeah. But this is it's a long. We have so many stories. What's the name again, please? I mean,
Matt.
I'm getting a little bit older.
That's
Matt.
okay. It's Matt.
Mac. The Caribbean have a lot of stories. I still remember all the time when you get along with the old salesman, the captains from all the islands. They all had new stories of very interesting story. But the Caribbean was like till today a little bit. I mean, things change now a lot. But the islands always was vulnerable in transportation. The never it was had been organized, and it was really to see the big companies when they came over the containers, all the big companies when they started in the Caribbean. They had make always still today. You get like Jamaica, Panama, Miami, all the three big centers where all the cargo goes, and from there they're feeding it to the other islands, and it's still very pretty to do. That still happens.
So, what is like one of the biggest differences between working down in the Caribbean and working up in the U.S. with shipping?
The regulation of the flag you had at that moment, but the only what you had to comply more for just for the insurance company, that was that you had to be classified and you had to keep your all your status okay.
Okay.
But it's very for me it's very interested and very. And till today, you still some remember some part of the histories, and you say, "Wow!" And but now these days, it looks like it's getting a little bit more tougher. When now you have more inspections, you have the Coast Guard, you have the all the entities, new entities they brought in. uh, for state control, and it's it's almost impossible. It's getting too expensive to maintain and to have a business like this, because it is like that's why Francis didn't follow much our steps, because just when Francis was near to step into it, it was getting more difficulties. One dry dock will cost you so much money, and to comply with all that, even you was building up slowly, but all these equipments that they ask you to have on board, they had only maybe 2 or 4 years of time enough to put it new on board. So it was in so much investment, and you wasn't sure anymore that you will say, okay, now we have to go to dry dock, and now we have a bill from $300,000 to we can. You have to make 3 dry docks in 4 years. So could I make that of a recuperate what I invested to get to get them gone, keep on going on the next 4 years? So it was then we decided it's not worth it to go anymore with it, because the government's not that old time years, because the islands was the government, even the Dutch government was subsidized the the freight, and you had every month so much money that you could really, at least you had your expensive, and it was worth it. But since they stopped all that part, it was getting harder and harder. But it is really nice. The islands, I mean, the islands still there. All the islands are still there, and they're not going to move from there, and they're going to still have to import everything. And who knows? We hope that one day, maybe one day, we will have really a Caribbean uh, com- company will come up with with a feeding service to the islands.
Yeah, because right now it's very fragmented, right? It's right now it's every man for himself, and there isn't really one company that will bring to every island. It's some
No,
islands have, some
yeah, it was
islands don't.
still, yeah, still, no, you have, like we said, Curacao remain a part of it, but not so much anymore, because the port expensive went so high, so they moved more now to Jamaica, Panama, and Miami. So, and you see, in the world, we're getting bigger ships, bigger and bigger ships, taking about, not like we're not getting now the Chinese ones coming out with 7,000 container in one bound here. So they will go, and it is all everything, and always, Francis, money. You know, everything, and if it's money, and but like we hope that Curacao at least will prepare himself to get this huge vessels in. We get them in here. But we know Cuba and Brazil had invested a lot of money, and Mariel is one of the port that they're gonna use to lay off everything there, and from there, the small companies feeding service around. It is we still have to wait for these changes. They're coming. We know they're coming. But it is the same story. You only have to go backwards. This 7,000 we're talking about, and then we was 4,000. Just remember ourselves when we started with a 40 tons vessel. Then we came up to 500 ton. Okay, no, but the 500 ton is not. No, 1,000 ton you need. Then we went to 2,500. Then we get to 5,000 ton. Then we had enough. but it is the expense to bring you up that you have to build up the tonnage, and that's the way it goes. It's really there's all this going on, and that's going to change. That's the same thing going to happen now. Only I don't know how fast now with this new COVID problem, how fast people will keep on moving.
Yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
It's gonna do something, but we'll have to see. I want to say, Matt, maybe we should like I don't know if we can have my dad on again in the future, like for like some more, like he has a bunch of stories. He has like a lot of stories from back in the day. So
I would definitely love to hear some more. So we should do this again. Absolutely. I'd love to talk a little bit more about, shipping in the Caribbean and some of the best ports to go to, some fun shakedown stories, anything like that.
Oh yeah. Seaman stay a seaman. So
absolutely.
The shakedown stories for sure.
Yeah, I remember a lot of them. Yeah, that's at least the only thing left behind in my heart. What all that money had cost. Those stories still are lovely to sometimes remember them.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about being a sailor. You always have the stories.
Yeah. And if you don't have one right away, somebody have one, because you've been hanging around with other around. They have another one, and the one that is bigger than the other one, more adventure than the other one. And that's the way it goes, because so many hours on sea, you have to fill it out. And sometimes there's a lot of liars around to, if they make a mosquito to an elephant, from the stories. So, yeah. But think about it, whatever you want. Sometimes we have sure, and the best thing is come down. Then we have days for the stories.
Absolutely, I'm planning on it as soon as this COVID passes.
Yeah, that's make it more interested, because then we can do it on the Siemens system, on the bar.
I don't know. I've never been to one of those. I don't know what you're talking about.
No. Yeah, you don't drink. You don't go to. All right. Well,
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Always. My regards over there. And how's your people doing now with the COVID over there?
Well, in New York, it's getting better. Half in the rest of the country, it's actually getting worse right now.
Okay.
A lot of the states decided to not follow government guidelines, and it's just getting worse. So we'll see what happens over the next few weeks.
Yeah. Now weeks. That looks like months.